Okay, so you can start by introducing yourself.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Neil Monaco. I am an English teacher at King Drew Magnet High School of Medicine and Science. I've been at King Drew this is my 21st year, and I am one of the cohort teachers of the ninth grade.
So why did you choose teaching and why King Drew?
Well, there's actually two answers there. I chose teaching because my whole life, people told me, I mean, even as a young person, that I would be a good teacher. And I never really took it in. And so I did other things first. I was an actor and I was a director. I was a filmmaker for a time. And as I got older, I began to feel like I wanted to do something, let's say something with more significance. And it was that time that I began substitute teaching in LA. I'm originally from New York. But as I went from school to school, and I went to 20 different schools all across that section of Los Angeles, there were two schools that stood out to me. One was Fairfax High School, and the other was King Drew. And I just got lucky that King Drew ended up having a position open because two of the teachers had gone out on maternity leave. And so I was hired as a long-term sub. And then I was able to just stay forever after that. King Drew impressed me as the best run school at the time. The students, even as a substitute, that's a tricky job, substitute teacher. You're not always treated very well, but the students at King Drew were always respectful and interested in learning. And also the building was brand new at the time. It was the year 2000, and it was it was the most impressive school, and so that's why King Drew.
And how do you maintain good relationships with your students?
I really think that comes down to how I felt as a high school student, and I'll be honest, and this may not make it in the final cut, but I did not like high school. I hated school, as a matter of fact. I didn't want to go to my classes. The only thing I liked about it was the clubs. I was in a couple of clubs that I liked, but I didn't like the classes. I didn't like the teaching, the teachers. It was boring. It was annoying. And what I remember that, and I remember that to this day. And one of the things that I thought, if I was going to be a high school teacher, was that I would try to make it less miserable for my students somehow. I would try to keep in mind myself as a 15-year-old or 14-year-old or 13-year-old, even in high school, ninth grade, just really not wanting to be there, and what would help make that student feel more involved. And I can't say I always succeed, but I do have that in my mind where I want to make it less awful for my students.
And what key points do you want your students to take from your class?
There's, I think, maybe two things. One, I want them to understand the value of work, of hard work, putting in the time, putting in the effort, and really committing to producing something of value that represents them. So even if it's something, and Nina, you remember probably the journals, for example, right, at ninth grade. And this is something that some students love because they like to write about themselves and write about their lives, and other students really don't like. But either way, it gets the student into the habit of writing and producing something. And it's not enough to think something. It's not enough to just tell me a story about your life, but to write it down is a different process. And if I can get students to understand that producing something is valuable in itself, that's the one thing. The other is I like my students to be skeptical. I like them to think critically. So anything that's coming into you as a person from the world, anything that's being, coming at you from the news or TV shows or movies or other people, to take it in, but also to look at it with a viewpoint that is more inclusive of as many positions as possible. So, and we have that in also in ninth grade in the controversial issue essay, where I asked the students present more than one side of an issue, and to be able to understand that there's always multiple sides of an issue, and to understand as many of those sides as possible before coming up with one's own opinion. I'm very aware that students may be pushed in a particular direction, and I'm very, very serious about not pushing them in any direction, but letting them find their own direction through exploration and research, and this idea of critical thinking, looking at more than one side and considering all of that. So producing good work and engaging in critical thinking would probably be my two most important concepts.
So this year has been a little different with distance learning, and what challenges have you faced with it and how have you adapted?
The part of the distance learning model that I really have struggled with is the connection part. There's nothing more exciting for me than being in my room and having my students come into the room and engaging with them in real time, face to face, in that room. And I get so much from that, just personally. And this is the selfish me. This is me saying, what do I get? And I get so much back from students, and it comes from that interaction. And to me, that's the whole point of me being there. For me, like I said, that's the selfish part, is being able to interact with the students, and that doesn't happen so much distance learning wise. I mean, as we all know, some students don't want to turn the cameras on, and some, the camera's on, but I'm looking at a ceiling fan, or there's a cat in front of the keyboard, or, that all sorts of things going on that get in the way of that connection. The worst part are the audio glitches, where you can only hear every other word, and it is impossible to, I shouldn't say impossible, it's nearly impossible to make those connections. And it's also nearly impossible to have a flow, to have timing within the lesson. A lot of us are very concerned about, okay, how long should this take? All right, I know we have to convey this particular concept and I have a certain amount of time, but if things are so glitchy and technical snafus left and right, it becomes impossible to time oneself and to be able to react and respond live with that student or with a group of students. So that's been the biggest challenge. The way I've adapted is I've tried to minimize that part of it, and I've had to focus more on student writing, which is not so bad because that's what I do anyway. But there's less of me and more of their writing. So in one way, they're getting more practice, but they're also getting less of the interaction, the back and forth. It's all through typing. It's all through threaded discussions, where they're typing a response to someone else instead of speaking, because I want to avoid that audio glitch factor. So it's all written out, which, still gets it done, but it's still not as nearly as exciting as having it live.
Yeah, I agree with that too. And also, what do you like to do in your free time?
Oh, I wish I could take this computer and show you. I have my garden out back here. I garden. I know it's I'm so old. I like to grow things in my garden. I grow wonderful collard greens. I have these huge collard green plants that are 10 feet tall. Right now, I just put in some tomatoes because it's spring, and we've got to plant the tomatoes and some beautiful herbs. So I do as much of that as I can. And I also, well, not so much lately, but because the gyms were all closed, I took up about a year and a half ago indoor rock climbing because of a former student. A former student came back, and worked at a rock climbing place. And I said, I was always interested in that. And so I went and she gave me a lesson. And ever since I'm climbing the walls. Well, not literally, but in some cases, yes, literally climbing the rock climbing walls. And that's a lot of fun, but I haven't done it in a really long time. So I don't even know if I remember how, but I want to get back as soon as I can because it's so much fun. That's about it.
When I wanted to get my own house, I wanted to have a garden too and plant a whole bunch of flowers and fruits and
Oh,
stuff.
oh, it's wonderful. And also flowers. I did flowers for a year. I liked wildflowers, and there's also edible wildflowers.
Mm,
You can literally just go up to the flower and eat it, which
wow.
is so it's kind
I
of
would
strange.
like to try that, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty, right? And also I love that the hummingbirds,
Yeah.
come in to some
Mm.
flowers, which is so cool to watch. I'm so glad you would do that. That's it's a great hobby, and you'll never grow hungry, right? Because
Yeah, and it's kind of peaceful to just look at it too.
it absolutely is, and it's sort of miraculous. I never really appreciated nature as much as I do now, seeing things grow from seeds, and say, well, how does that work? And how quickly in some cases it does work.
Yeah.
And then, eventually you're eating it, you're taking a bite out of something that you grew from a little teeny tiny seed. It's kind of exciting. But as I talk about it, I feel like I'm so boring. It's like it's like gardening, seeds, plants. That's like, oh, I should. That's why I'm trying to balance it with the rock climbing because that's a little more
Yeah.
exciting. Yeah, at least.
And the last question is, what advice would you have for the incoming ninth graders or just words of wisdom?
Oh, I have so much wisdom, so much wisdom coming out. I think that wisdom is something you can't really impart. I believe. I think wisdom has to come to a person organically, to use an overused word. I think one has to, uh, you know, experience something, but I'll try anyway. Something I've learned is the value of work, of hard work, and that should be that should be the reward in itself, is doing your best. To do one's best, even if it's in something that you don't even want to do, but you're doing it. We have this often with testing, testing from the state and testing from the district, and all these tests that come from nowhere. And my students will always say, well, do I really need to do my best? Or is this important? Or will this affect my grade? Or will this affect my position? I say, well, you know what? I don't know the answer to most of those questions because I don't know how much these tests are going to affect you, but you're doing them anyway. So why not do your best? Just as a matter of course, just do your best on everything. And at the very least, you'll be able to come out on the other side of it and go, well, I did my best. And that's not a bad thing to come away with. No matter if the test is forgotten about or the test is never used, it doesn't matter. You've done your best. Is so much better than saying, oh, I blew it off. I mean, anybody can blow off anything. Anybody can not put in the effort. But what is one accomplishing other than being lazy or being disaffected or being um, checking out? And I think that this is something that comes with being older. The closer you get to the end of your life, not that I'm that old, but I'm getting there, the more you value time, and the more you value how you deal with time. When I was in high school, I didn't get any of this. And if you had told me this, what I'm saying right now in high school, I would have gone, yeah, right, sure, I'll do that. I'd rather not. I'd rather watch TV, or something. So I get it. That's why wisdom can't necessarily be handed down. But I'm happy to answer the question. I really think, to see if you can find the value in doing your best, aside from the result. To see the value in doing hard work for the sake of doing that work is kind of a tough concept. But I do think that it does have value. At least it does to me.